Marcus Collins spent his evenings in his one-room apartment on the outskirts of Akron, just as he had spent them for the past 3 years, alone. At 28, he worked full-time at an auto parts warehouse, earning enough to pay rent in an old brick house, buy groceries at the nearby supermarket, and occasionally drink beer at the local railroad bar. He had virtually no social life. Marcus's apartment reflected his character: modest, functional, without frills. A worn sofa in front of a small TV, a table by the window with a laptop he had bought on credit 2 years ago, and a kitchen the size of a storage room. There were no pictures or photographs on the walls, just a calendar from a local car service and utility bills pinned to the refrigerator with magnets. Marcus always had difficulty communicating with people. At school, he kept to himself, avoiding noisy groups and preferring to spend his time reading books or playing video games. After graduating from high school, he enrolled in a local technical college, but dropped out after a year and a half when he realized that engineering required more social interaction than he could handle. Working in a warehouse was perfect for him. Clear instructions, minimal conversation with colleagues, a predictable daily routine. His mother, Linda, often called from the neighboring town, where she worked as a cashier in a grocery store, and asked anxiously about his personal life. "Marcus, dear, you need to get out and socialize," she repeated during their weekly phone calls. "You can't sit at home your whole life. How will you find a good girl?" Marcus usually responded evasively, saying that everything was fine, that he was just busy with work. The truth was that Marcus didn't know how to meet women. Several attempts at bars ended in awkward silences and hasty departures home. He felt clumsy, uninteresting, as if he had nothing to offer a potential partner. Gradually, he stopped trying and immersed himself in the virtual world. The internet became a refuge for Marcus. Here, he could be different, more confident, more interesting. He spent hours on various forums discussing movies, video games, and sports. Behind the computer screen, words came more easily to him. He could think about his response, edit his message, and present himself in the best light. It was on social media that he first saw Cynthia Jenkins' profile. It happened at the end of last year, when Marcus was looking for people with similar interests in his area. Cynthia's profile caught his attention. A young woman from a small town an hour's drive from Akron who loved the same movies he did and wrote short but sincere posts about her everyday life. In her photos, Cynthia looked pretty. Short brown hair, kind eyes, a shy smile. Her pictures were simple: selfies at home, photos from her job at a local cafe, a few landscapes of her hometown. Nothing pretentious or ostentatious, exactly what Marcus valued in people. He hesitated for a long time before writing her his first message. For weeks, he read her posts and liked them, but couldn't bring himself to start a conversation. Finally, when Cynthia posted about her favorite movie, Blade Runner, which was also his favorite, Marcus plucked up his courage. "Hi, I saw your post about Blade Runner. It's my favorite movie. What do you think of the sequel?" he wrote, spending almost half an hour composing this simple message. To his surprise, Cynthia replied within a few hours. Their correspondence began with a discussion of movies, but gradually shifted to more personal topics. Cynthia talked about her job at her family's cafe, how she helps her father around the house, and her dreams of traveling. Marcus shared his thoughts on work, books, and plans for the future, things he had never spoken about aloud before. What began as a chance encounter grew into something much more over the months. Marcus found himself eagerly awaiting Cynthia's messages, his day feeling incomplete without their evening chats. She was a patient listener, always ready to support him when he complained about difficulties at work or shared his doubts. "You are a special person, Marcus," she wrote to him late one night. "You see the world differently than others. That is a rare gift." Those words warmed his soul for weeks. No one had ever said anything like that to him before. Gradually, their relationship became more intimate. They exchanged photos, told each other about their fears and hopes, and made plans for the future. Cynthia was sensitive and understanding. never rushing things or demanding more from him than he was ready to give. Marcus began to spend more and more money on gifts for Cynthia. At first, they were small things: a book she mentioned in conversation, a piece of jewelry he saw in a shop window and thought she would like. Cynthia was always grateful, sending photos of herself with the gifts, which only fueled his desire to please her. Over time, the gifts became more expensive. Marcus ordered flowers to be delivered to her town for various holidays, bought her expensive cosmetics that she had casually mentioned in conversation, and even sent her a new smartphone when Cynthia complained that her old phone wasn't working well. Each purchase required serious financial sacrifices. Marcus took on extra shifts at the warehouse, cut back on food, and saved money intended for other needs. His co-workers noticed the change in his behavior. Jim, an older warehouse worker who worked the same shift as Marcus, asked him one day, "Hey, you seem happier lately. Got a girlfriend?" Marcus blushed and replied evasively, "Something like that." Indeed, Marcus felt more confident. His virtual relationship with Cynthia gave him strength and made his days more meaningful. He began to pay more attention to his appearance, bought new clothes, and even joined a gym, although he didn't go there regularly. After 6 months of correspondence, Cynthia mentioned meeting up for the first time. "It would be great to see you in person," she wrote one evening. "I often think about what it would be like to really hug you." Marcus felt his heart beat faster. He had been dreaming about this moment for months, but now that the opportunity had become real, he was overcome with doubts. "What if you don't like me in real life?" He confessed his fears to her. "People always say I'm weird and awkward." "Marcus, I already like you," Cynthia replied. "I know you better than many people I've dated over the years. Appearance isn't as important as a person's soul." Those words finally convinced him. They began planning a weekend meeting. Cynthia suggested that he come to her town. It would be easier than her traveling to Akron. Marcus agreed, even though the trip would require additional expenses for gas and possibly a motel room if the meeting ran late. He spent his last savings on a new suit, expensive flowers, and a restaurant dinner he planned to treat Cynthia to. Marcus wanted their first meeting to be unforgettable, to show her how important she was to him. Cynthia Jenkins woke up every morning at 6:30 a.m. in the small house on Maple Street that she had shared with her father, David, for 6 years, ever since her mother died. The house was built in the 1950s, with 2 bedrooms, a living room, and a kitchen that also served as a dining room. David Jenkins, a carpenter with calloused hands and tired eyes, did his best to keep their home cozy after the loss of his wife. At 24, Cynthia was as independent as her condition allowed. Her Down syndrome was relatively mild. She could read, write, perform everyday tasks, and even work part-time at the family-owned Mary's Cafe in the town center. However, her developmental differences were noticeable in her speech, which was sometimes slurred, in her slower perception of complex information, and in her distinctive facial features. David treated his daughter with touching care, but without excessive protectiveness. He understood the importance of her independence and encouraged Cynthia's attempts to cope with life's challenges on her own. "Cynthia, you can do more than people think," he often told her. "The main thing is not to give up." Working in the cafe came easily to Cynthia. Mary Harrison, the elderly owner of the establishment, hired her 3 years ago more out of sympathy for the widowed David, but quickly realized that Cynthia was a reliable and hard-working employee. The girl wiped tables, washed dishes, and sometimes took simple orders from regular customers who were used to her special way of speaking. Mary's Cafe was the center of social life in the small town. Pensioners gathered here for morning coffee, local workers during their lunch break, and high school students after school. Cynthia knew most of the visitors by name and always greeted them with a friendly smile. Many treated her with kindness, but she also felt the condescending glances and awkwardness of some new customers. "Cynthia is a special girl," people in town would say about her. The word "special" always hurt her ears. She knew what people meant. And although most said it kindly, she understood the subtext. She wasn't like the others. She was different. That's why meeting Marcus online was a revelation for her. Behind the computer screen, she could just be Cynthia, not special, not the girl with Down syndrome, but a normal woman with thoughts, feelings, and dreams. She carefully selected photos for her profile, choosing ones where her differences were less noticeable. She wrote messages slowly but thoughtfully, checking every word to avoid mistakes that could give away her condition. The lie started small. When Marcus asked about her job, she said she worked in a cafe, but didn't mention that she had been hired out of pity. When he asked about her education, she vaguely replied that she had taken some courses after school, omitting the fact that she had attended a special vocational training program for people with developmental disabilities. With each passing day of their correspondence, the lies became heavier. Cynthia understood that she was deceiving a kind person who had sincerely grown attached to her. She saw how Marcus opened up to her, sharing his fears and doubts, and she felt like a traitor. But the fear of losing him was stronger than her guilty conscience. "Dad, what if someone loves you for who you are?" she asked one evening as they ate dinner in the kitchen. David looked up from his plate of pasta. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" "Well, if someone thinks you're different and then finds out the truth, will they stop loving you?" David put down his fork. He knew about his daughter's correspondence with a certain Marcus, but he didn't go into details, trusting her common sense. Now he realized that the question was not accidental. "Cindy, true love doesn't disappear just because someone learns something new about you," he said cautiously. "If someone stops loving you after learning the truth, then they weren't loving you, but their idea of you." These words were meant to reassure her, but instead, they increased her anxiety. What if Marcus really loved the idea of her and not her? What if the truth destroyed the beautiful thing that had developed between them? Cynthia spent hours reading forums and articles about people with Down syndrome who had started families, built relationships, and lived full lives. She knew it was possible, but she also knew how rare it was. Most people saw them as eternal children, incapable of serious relationships or true love. Working at the cafe became her refuge from these thoughts. Here she could focus on simple, understandable tasks. Mary often praised her for her diligence and punctuality. "Cynthia, you're better than many of the young people who have worked here," the elderly woman would say, and these words warmed the girl's heart. But even at the cafe, she couldn't completely forget about Marcus. Every message from him made her heart beat faster. Every gift he sent filled her with both joy and guilt. It was especially painful to receive flowers with cards where he wrote, "To the most beautiful woman in the world," or "To the one who makes my life better." Was she really beautiful? Did she really make his life better? Or was it all based on a lie? Her co-workers noticed changes in her behavior. Cynthia became distracted, often smiling for no reason while looking at her phone. When someone asked her why she was in such a good mood, she blushed and replied evasively, "Just a good day." Her anxiety intensified when Marcus started talking about meeting up. Cynthia dreamed of seeing him, hugging him, talking face to face, but she understood that this would mean the end of their relationship. As soon as he saw her, everything would become clear. Her distinctive appearance, slow speech, and sometimes awkward movements would give away her condition in the first few minutes. "Maybe if he loves my soul, my appearance won't matter," she thought. But her inner voice told her that this was naive. People see first, and then they get to know. And what they see could erase all the beautiful things that were between them. Several times, Cynthia was ready to tell Marcus the truth in her messages. She even started typing, "Marcus, I have something to tell you," but each time she deleted the text without sending it. The fear of losing him was too strong. Finally, when the meeting was scheduled for the weekend, Cynthia realized that the moment of truth had come. She decided to do everything possible to look her best. She spent her savings on a new dress and shoes, made an appointment with a hairdresser, and bought cosmetics. If Marcus still turned away from her, at least she would know that she had done everything she could. David watched his daughter's preparations with concern. He didn't know the details of her correspondence, but he could see how important this relationship had become to her. On Thursday evening, as Cynthia tried on her new dress in front of the mirror in the living room, he decided to have a serious talk with her. "Cynthia, this young man Marcus, does he know everything about you?" Cynthia froze, staring at her reflection. In the mirror, she saw a young woman in a beautiful dress, but she also noticed the features that always gave away her differences. "No, Dad," she replied quietly. "I haven't told him." David walked over to her and put his hands on her shoulders. "Sweetheart, you are beautiful just the way you are. If this guy can't understand that, then he doesn't deserve you." "But I'm afraid, Dad," Cynthia admitted, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm afraid he'll look at me and think I've been deceiving him." "Did you lie to him?" her father asked gently. Cynthia thought for a moment. "I didn't lie about my feelings. I didn't lie about liking the same movies or working at a cafe. I just didn't tell him one thing." "An important thing," David noted. "Yes, a very important thing." They stood in silence for a few minutes. Finally, David said, "Cynthia, you have two choices. You can cancel the meeting and continue to be afraid, or you can meet him and find out if he's really the person you fell in love with. True love stands the test of time." On Friday night, Cynthia hardly slept. She reread old messages from Marcus, recalled their virtual conversations, and tried to find clues in them as to how he might react to the truth. Marcus always talked about inner beauty, about the importance of a person's soul. But it's one thing to talk about it abstractly, and quite another to face reality. On Saturday morning, Cynthia woke up with a firm decision. She would meet with Marcus. If their relationship was real, it would survive the truth. If not, it was better to find out now than to continue living a lie. Saturday, 7:30 a.m. Marcus Collins sat in his used 2018 Honda Civic, parked near his house on the outskirts of Akron. The engine idled, a wisp of smoke rising from the exhaust pipe in the cool autumn air. On the passenger seat lay a bouquet of 24 red roses, one for each year of Cynthia's life. In the trunk, gifts awaited him. Expensive perfume from a well-known brand that he had ordered online, and a small gold heart-shaped pendant that had cost him almost half his monthly salary. Marcus nervously drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. The drive to Cynthia's town took just over an hour, but he had left early to give himself time to collect his thoughts. He had hardly slept in the last few days, running through possible scenarios of their meeting in his head. What if she didn't like him? What if their virtual chemistry didn't translate to the real world? What if he turned out to be the awkward, uninteresting person he always felt like? He glanced at himself in the rearview mirror. His new suit fit well, and he looked respectable. The barber had tidied up his hair yesterday. He even bought expensive cologne, although he didn't usually use perfume. Today, he had to make the best impression possible. Marcus took out his phone and reread the latest message from Cynthia. "I can't wait to see you. See you at Mary's Cafe at 11 a.m. I'll be wearing a blue dress. Love you." These words gave him confidence. She loved him. They had been building their relationship for 6 months, getting to know each other, and now it was time to take the next step. 8:45 a.m. Marcus turned on the radio and drove onto the highway. An hour's drive along the picturesque roads of Ohio usually calmed him down, but today he barely noticed the autumn scenery outside the window. Thoughts swirled in his head. He rehearsed the first words he would say to Cynthia, imagined how he would hug her, how they would dine at the expensive restaurant he had booked for the evening. The radio was playing soft music, but Marcus turned it off. He needed silence to concentrate. He stopped at a gas station to buy gum and check his appearance in the bathroom mirror one more time. Everything was fine. He was ready. 10:30 a.m. Marcus drove into the small town where Cynthia lived. The streets were quiet, typical of provincial America. Neat houses with small yards, old trees, a few local shops. He easily found Mary's Cafe in the center of town, a small establishment with display windows and a handmade sign. Marcus parked across from the cafe and remained seated in his car. He still had half an hour before the meeting. He could see several customers through the cafe windows, an elderly couple at a corner table, a middle-aged man reading a newspaper, a woman with a child. But Cynthia was not among them. His nervousness grew with every passing minute. Marcus checked his phone. No new messages. He took some mints out of the glove compartment and ate one, then another. His hands were shaking slightly. 10:55. It was time to go. Marcus picked up the bouquet of roses and checked that the gifts were in the trunk. He planned to give them to her later, during their walk. He took a deep breath, got out of the car, and headed for the cafe entrance. The bell above the door rang melodiously as Marcus entered. The cafe was cozy and warm, smelling of freshly brewed coffee and homemade pastries. An elderly woman stood behind the counter, apparently the very Mary, after whom the establishment was named. "Welcome, dear," she smiled. "Table for one?" "No, thank you. I'm waiting for someone," Marcus replied, looking around the room. Cynthia was still nowhere to be seen. He chose a table by the window with a good view of the street and ordered a coffee. 11 a.m., 11:05. Marcus began to worry. Was Cynthia late? But then the bell rang again, and a young woman in a blue dress entered the cafe. Marcus looked up and felt the world around him slow down. It was Cynthia. He recognized her features, her chestnut hair, her shy smile. But what he saw was completely different from what he had expected. The characteristics of her appearance that were not noticeable in the photos were now obvious. Her distinctive facial features, slightly unsteady gait, and unique mannerisms all clearly indicated Down syndrome. Cynthia saw him and waved, her face lighting up with a joyful smile. "Marcus, it's really you!" She approached the table, and Marcus automatically stood up, still in shock. Cynthia looked beautiful in her new dress. Her hair was neatly styled, but the reality was harsh. This was not the woman he had imagined for months. "Hi, Cynthia," he said, trying to control his voice. He handed her the bouquet of roses. "These are for you." "Oh, how beautiful," she exclaimed, accepting the flowers. Her joy was sincere and touching. "Thank you so much. No one has ever given me such beautiful flowers." She sat down across from him, and Marcus noticed some of the other patrons glancing their way. He felt the heat of embarrassment rising to his face. An elderly couple at the next table exchanged glances and whispered something to each other. Marcus was sure they were talking about them. "You look even more beautiful than in your photos," Cynthia said, looking at him adoringly. "I've been waiting for this for so long." Marcus nodded, not knowing what to say. Conflicting thoughts swirled in his head. On the one hand, this was the same Cynthia he had been corresponding with for 6 months, sharing his thoughts and making plans. Her voice, her manner of speaking, even her gestures. All of this was familiar from their video calls, although at the time he hadn't paid attention to the details. On the other hand, he felt cheated. Why hadn't she told him? Why had she hidden something so important? "Marcus, are you okay?" Cynthia asked, noticing his confusion. "You look upset." "No, I'm fine," he lied. "I'm just a little nervous. This is our first meeting." They ordered coffee and pastries. Cynthia chatted about her job at the cafe, how she had prepared for the meeting, and her plans for the day. Marcus listened half-heartedly, struggling with his inner conflict. He understood that Cynthia was a good person. She was kind, sincere, and her feelings for him seemed genuine. But he also knew that he could never introduce her to his friends, colleagues, or mother. What would people think? "Remember when we talked about that movie American Beauty?" Cynthia said, trying to keep the conversation going. "You said that beauty isn't always visible on the outside." These words hit Marcus like a slap in the face. He really had said that. He had said many beautiful words about inner beauty, about how appearance isn't important. But now, faced with reality, he realized that he had been insincere even to himself. "Cynthia," he began cautiously, "why didn't you tell me about yourself?" The smile faded from her face. She lowered her eyes to her coffee cup. "What are you talking about?" "You know what I'm talking about," Marcus said more quietly. "About your condition." Cynthia was silent for a long time. When she looked up, Marcus saw tears in her eyes. "I was afraid," she said quietly. "I was afraid you wouldn't want to know me." "But that's a lie," Marcus said, bitterness in his voice. "You lied to me for 6 months." "I didn't lie about my feelings," Cynthia replied. "I didn't lie about loving you. I just didn't tell you one thing." "One thing?" Marcus felt anger rising inside him. "Cynthia, it's not just one thing. It changes everything." Cynthia began to cry. Several cafe patrons turned to look at them, making Marcus feel even more uncomfortable. "You're right," she said through her tears. "I should have told you, but I was so afraid of losing you." Marcus looked at her and felt a mixture of pity and irritation. On the one hand, he understood her fears. On the other, he couldn't forgive her for deceiving him. All the money he had spent, all the plans, all the dreams, it was all based on a lie. "I need to think," he said, getting up from the table. "This is too sudden." "Marcus, please don't leave," Cynthia pleaded. "We can talk about this. I'm the same person you've been writing to. Nothing has changed." "Everything has changed," he said sharply. "Everything." He threw the money for the coffee on the table and headed for the door. Cynthia hurried after him, leaving the bouquet of roses on the table. "Marcus, wait!" she shouted, catching up with him on the street. He stopped by his car and turned to her. "What else have you been hiding from me, Cynthia? What else?" "Nothing else," she said, wiping away her tears. "I swear, nothing else." Marcus looked at her, his mind torn by conflicting emotions. Part of him wanted to hug her, tell her that everything was okay, that they would work it out. But a stronger part of him felt humiliated, betrayed. He imagined telling his mother about his girlfriend with Down syndrome. He imagined the looks from his co-workers. He imagined them whispering behind his back. "I spent everything on you," he said quietly but angrily. "All my savings, I thought you were special." "I am special," Cynthia said, "just not in the way you thought." That word, special, exploded in Marcus's head. Yes, she was special. Special, as people with disabilities are called when people are trying to be polite. Special, as they called her in this town, where everyone knew her and treated her with condescending kindness. "Let's go to your place," he said unexpectedly. "I want to talk in private." Cynthia nodded, wiping away her tears. "Okay, my house is not far from here." They drove to Cynthia's house. She gave him directions, and Marcus drove in silence. A storm of emotions raged in his head. Anger at her for deceiving him. Anger at himself for being naive. Shame for wasting his money so foolishly. Disappointment at the collapse of all his plans and dreams. The house on Maple Street was modest, but neat. David Jenkins was at work, and the house was empty. Cynthia led Marcus into the living room and offered him tea or coffee. He declined. "Cynthia," he said as they sat down on the sofa, "do you realize what you've done?" "I know I hurt you," she replied, "but I didn't know how to tell you I was afraid." "You were afraid, but how do you think I felt when I found out the truth? How do you think I felt in that cafe when everyone was staring at us?" Cynthia cringed. "You're ashamed of me." Marcus didn't answer, but his silence spoke louder than words. "I didn't want to deceive you," Cynthia said quietly. "I just wanted you to love me for who I am inside." "But I didn't know who you were," Marcus replied. "You only showed me what you wanted me to see." Cynthia got up from the sofa and walked over to the window. "Marcus, I'm the same person you corresponded with. My feelings for you are real. My love is real. And my feelings were based on a lie, he said sharply. These words hit Cynthia like a blow. She turned to him, and he saw the pain in her eyes. So you never loved me. You loved a made-up image. Marcus felt a pang of conscience, but his anger was stronger. Did I have a choice? You didn't give me a chance to love the real you. A heavy silence hung between them. Cynthia cried as she stood by the window. Marcus sat on the sofa, struggling with conflicting emotions. Part of him understood her motives and sympathized with her fears. But another part, the stronger part, felt betrayed. What happens now? Cynthia asked. Marcus didn't know how to answer. He had come here with plans for a romantic day, perhaps for a future together. Now all those plans lay in ruins. David Jenkins returned home at 6:30 in the evening after a long day of work at a construction site in a neighboring neighborhood. His old Ford pickup truck screeched to a halt as he parked in the driveway of his house on Maple Street. It had been a tough day. They were installing a roof on a new house, and the work had been delayed by unexpected rain in the afternoon. David noticed an unfamiliar Honda Civic parked on the sidewalk across from his house. He remembered Cynthia mentioning that she was meeting Marcus, the young man she had been corresponding with. He smiled to himself. The meeting must be going well if they were already home. As he climbed the porch steps, he noticed that the front door was slightly ajar. This was strange. Cynthia always locked the door carefully. It was one of the safety rules he had taught her. David frowned and gently pushed the door. "Cynthia?" he called as he entered the hallway. "I'm home." There was no answer. The house was unusually quiet. Usually, Cynthia greeted him with joyful exclamations and told him about her day. David walked into the living room and froze. Cynthia was lying on the floor near the sofa in her blue dress. Her chestnut hair was tousled, and there were dark spots on her neck. Her eyes were closed, her face deathly pale. Scattered rose petals lay near the body, apparently from the bouquet she had received that morning. "Cynthia!" David cried, rushing to his daughter. He fell to his knees beside her and took her hand. Her skin was cold. There was no pulse. David didn't remember how he got his phone. His hands were shaking as he dialed 911. "Emergency services, how can we help you?" "My daughter is dead," he said, barely recognizing his own voice. "Send the police and an ambulance. Hurry, please." "Sir, give us the address." 1247 Maple Street. Hurry. "The cars are on their way." "Sir, don't touch anything at the scene. Don't move the body. Officers will be there in a few minutes." David put down the phone and looked at his daughter again. He wanted to pick her up, but the dispatcher's words stopped him. Instead, he sat down on the floor next to her and cried, for the first time since his wife's death 6 years ago. The first police car arrived 8 minutes later. Officer Tom Rodriguez, a veteran of the local police force, entered the house and immediately assessed the situation. He was followed by 2 more officers and an ambulance crew. "Sir, you need to leave the room," Rodriguez said gently but firmly to David. "Let us do our job." David was led out onto the porch, where a young officer named Michael Chang questioned him carefully, writing down his statements in a notebook. "What time did you get home, Mr. Jenkins?" "Around 6:30, maybe a little earlier." "When was the last time you saw your daughter alive?" "In the morning, before work, around 7 o'clock. She was getting ready to meet a young man." "What's his name?" "Marcus. Marcus Collins. She met him on the internet a few months ago." Chang wrote down the name. "Did you see him?" "No, but his car was here when I arrived." David pointed to an empty space by the sidewalk. "A silver Honda Civic. It's gone now." A team of forensic experts was working in the house. They photographed the scene, collected evidence, and drew a diagram of the layout of the room. The medical examiner, an elderly woman named Dr. Helen Wilson, examined the body. "The preliminary cause of death is strangulation," she told Officer Rodriguez. "There are clear signs of compression on the neck." The time of death is estimated to be between 2 and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but I'll be more precise after the autopsy. Signs of a struggle? Minimal. Perhaps the victim did not expect the attack. There is biological material under the fingernails, possibly the attacker's skin. I'll send it for DNA analysis. By 8 p.m., Detective Sarah Mitchell from the County Police Homicide Division had arrived at the scene. At 42, she had 15 years of experience investigating serious crimes. Tall, with short dark hair and piercing gray eyes, she had a reputation as a tenacious and methodical investigator. Mitchell carefully examined the crime scene, listened to reports from forensic scientists and medical examiners, and studied photographs. Then she went out to David Jenkins, who was still sitting on the porch steps under the supervision of an officer. "Mr. Jenkins, my name is Detective Mitchell. I will be investigating your daughter's case. I am very sorry for your loss." David looked up with tear-filled eyes. "Will you find the person who did this?" "I'll do everything I can. I need to ask you a few questions. It will help us find the killer." David nodded. "Tell me about Marcus Collins. What do you know about him?" "A little. Cindy met him online about 6 months ago. They wrote to each other. He sent her gifts. She was very happy." "Did she say anything specific about him?" "He works at a warehouse in Akron. He was 28 years old and lived alone. Cindy said he was kind, that he understood her." "Understood her? In what way?" David paused. "Detective, my daughter was special. She had Down syndrome. Not everyone is understanding toward people like that." Mitchell wrote this down in her notebook. A piece of the puzzle fell into place. "Did Mr. Collins know about your daughter's condition?" "I'm not sure. Cindy was sometimes afraid to tell people the truth. She was afraid they would turn away from her." "Did your daughter have any other admirers? Anyone who might have been jealous?" "No. Marcus was the first young man who showed interest in her. She was so happy." Mitchell wrote down the license plate number of Collins' car, which David had given her, and asked Officer Chang to check it against the database. Then she went to Mary's cafe, where, according to the father's testimony, the meeting was supposed to take place. Mary Harrison was still at the cafe, cleaning up after the day's work. The elderly woman was shocked by the news of Cynthia's death. "Oh my God, no!" she exclaimed, clutching her heart. "Cynthia's dead? How did it happen?" "We're investigating the circumstances. Mary, did you see Cynthia today?" "Yes, she came in this morning. She was meeting a young man. She was so excited, so beautifully dressed." "Tell me about this meeting. What did you see?" Mary sat down at one of the tables, and the detective sat down opposite her. Cynthia came around 11. The young man was already waiting for her. Tall, dark hair, wearing a suit. He had a large bouquet of roses. At first, everything looked sweet, romantic. At first? After a few minutes, the atmosphere changed. The young man looked upset. Cynthia started crying. He got up and headed for the exit, and she ran after him. "Did you hear what they were talking about?" "Not everything, but I heard him say something about cheating, and she replied that she was afraid to tell him." "Tell him what?" "I don't know. They were talking quietly, and I didn't want to eavesdrop." Mitchell recorded Mary's testimony and asked her to describe the young man's appearance in more detail. The description matched what one would expect from a 28-year-old man. The next step was to interview the neighbors on Maple Street. Most were at work during the day, but Mrs. Eleanor Parker, a retired woman from the house across the street, proved to be a helpful witness. "I saw a silver car around noon," she told Detective Mitchell. "A young man got out and walked to the Jenkins house. Then they both came out and drove away in his car." "What time did they return?" "About an hour later, maybe a little more. They went into the house." "And when did the car leave?" Mrs. Parker thought for a moment. "I don't remember exactly. I was watching my TV show, and then I fell asleep in my chair. When I woke up, the car was gone. It was around 4. "Did you see anyone leaving the house?" "No, I didn't." Another neighbor, Bob Miller, who had been working in his garage in the afternoon, also saw the silver Honda. "It drove away quickly," he told the detective. "The driver was obviously in a hurry. He almost knocked over my mailbox when he turned." "What time was that?" "Around 3:30, maybe a little later. I remember because I had just finished changing the oil in my pickup truck." By 10 p.m., Mitchell had returned to the station and filed her initial report. The picture of the crime was beginning to come into focus. Marcus Collins of Akron had met Cynthia Jenkins at a coffee shop. The meeting did not go as planned. A conflict arose over Cynthia's failure to disclose her diagnosis to him. They drove to her home, where the murder took place between 2:30 and 4 p.m. Collins left the scene of the crime in his car. Mitchell instructed Officer Chang to check Marcus Collins' address in Akron and arrange for surveillance of his apartment. The database confirmed that he had a 2018 silver Honda Civic registered to him. "We're going to Akron tomorrow morning," she told Chung. "We need to find this Collins guy and find out what happened at the Jenkins house." Meanwhile, forensic technicians continued their work at the crime scene. They found fingerprints on several items in the living room, including a doorknob and a glass of water in the kitchen. Biological material under the victim's fingernails was sent to the lab for DNA analysis. Dr. Wilson conducted a preliminary examination of the body at the scene. "The victim was strangled with bare hands," she told Detective Mitchell. "There are distinct fingerprints on the neck. The killer was stronger than the victim, but not necessarily significantly so. Down syndrome is often accompanied by muscle weakness, which could have made the attacker's task easier." "Any signs of sexual assault?" "Preliminarily, no. The clothes are intact. There is no damage to the relevant areas. But I will make my final conclusions after the full autopsy." At midnight, Detective Mitchell finished her work at the crime scene and went home. David Jenkins stayed with his brother in a neighboring town. He could no longer stay in the house where his daughter had been killed. Already in bed, Mitchell analyzed the information she had gathered. The case seemed relatively simple: a virtual relationship, deception, conflict, murder in the heat of passion. But she knew not to jump to conclusions. She needed to find Collins, hear his version of events, and compare the evidence. One thing bothered her. Why hadn't Collins tried to cover up the crime? Why hadn't he staged a robbery or an accident? Either he had acted in a state of intense emotional excitement and hadn't thought about the consequences, or there was something else going on. Early Sunday morning, news of Cynthia Jenkins' murder spread throughout the town. In such small communities, crimes against individuals were rare. People were shocked. Everyone knew Cynthia, had seen her in cafes, on the streets. She was a harmless, kind girl who had never hurt anyone. At the local church, Father mentioned Cynthia in his morning prayer, asking the congregation to pray for her soul and support her father during this difficult time. Many cried. Cynthia was part of their small community. Meanwhile, in Akron, Detective Mitchell and Officer Chang were preparing for a trip that would lead to the arrest of the killer. They did not know that they would find Marcus Collins in a state of complete psychological collapse, unable to hide his guilt. Monday, 6:45 a.m. Detective Sarah Mitchell and Officer Michael Cheng were driving down the interstate toward Akron. Mitchell was reviewing the case file, clarifying the details that needed to be ascertained when the suspect was apprehended. "Have you checked the address?" she asked, without looking up from the documents. "Yes. 4250 Oak Street, apartment 2B. The landlord confirmed that Marcus Collins has been renting a one-bedroom apartment for 3 years. He pays on time, and there have been no complaints about him." "Employer?" "Premium Parts Auto Warehouse on the industrial outskirts. They say he didn't show up for work on Monday, even though he was supposed to. It's his first absence in 2 years. Mitchell nodded. The behavior was consistent with what one would expect from someone who committed a crime in the heat of the moment: psychological shock, an inability to return to normal life. At 8:20 a.m., they parked near an old brick house on Oak Street. The silver 2018 Honda Civic was in its usual spot. The license plate numbers matched those David Jenkins had recorded. Mitchell and Chang went up to the second floor and stopped in front of the door to apartment 2B. The detective knocked 3 times. "Mr. Collins, police, please open the door." There were sounds from inside. Someone was moving around the apartment, but the door did not open. "Marcus Collins, this is Detective Mitchell from the county police. I need to talk to you." Finally, the lock clicked, and the door slowly opened. A man in his 30s appeared in the doorway, unshaven and wearing rumpled clothes. His eyes were red from lack of sleep, his hair tousled. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Are you Marcus Collins?" Mitchell asked. "Yes," he replied quietly, avoiding direct eye contact. "Mr. Collins, I need to ask you some questions about Cynthia Jenkins. May I come in?" At the mention of Cynthia's name, Marcus visibly tensed. His hands were shaking. "What happened to her?" "Mr. Collins, on Saturday night, Cynthia Jenkins was found dead in her home. We know you were with her that day." Marcus took a step back, his face turning even paler. "Dead?" "Yes. Mr. Collins, I need you to come with us to the station to give a statement." "I don't want to go anywhere," Marcus said, trying to close the door. Officer Chang quickly put his foot in the way, preventing the door from slamming shut. "Sir, please don't make this difficult." "Mr. Collins," Mitchell said firmly, "I have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of the murder of Cynthia Jenkins. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court." Marcus did not resist when Officer Chung handcuffed him. He seemed emotionally broken, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Neighbors peered out of their doors, watching what was happening. In the car on the way to the station, Marcus was silent, staring out the window. Mitchell studied him in the rearview mirror. The man was clearly in a state of deep psychological stress. At the station, Marcus was placed in an interrogation room, a small room with a metal table, 2 chairs, and a one-way mirror. Mitchell gave him time to calm down, brought him a glass of water, and then turned on the tape recorder. Interview with suspect Marcus Collins. Detective Mitchell and Officer Chang are present. Time, 10:45 a.m., October 18th. "Marcus, you have waived your right to an attorney. Is that your final decision?" "Yes," he replied quietly. "Tell me about Saturday. Did you meet with Cynthia Jenkins?" Marcus was silent for a long time, then nodded. "Yes, we met at a cafe." "How did the meeting go?" "Bad." Marcus's voice trembled. "She didn't tell me the truth about herself." "What truth?" "About her condition. She has Down syndrome. We corresponded for 6 months, and she never mentioned it." Mitchell wrote down every word. "How did you react to this discovery?" "I felt cheated. I spent everything on her. All my savings, all my plans. I thought there was something between us." "What happened after the cafe?" "We went to her house. I wanted to talk to her alone." "Tell me what happened at her house." Marcus covered his face with his hands. "We argued. She cried and said she was afraid to tell me. And I was angry. Very angry." "What happened next, Marcus?" "She came up to me, wanted to hug me. She said she loved me, that her feelings were real. And I couldn't look at her. I imagined what my mom would say, my colleagues. Everyone would laugh at me." Mitchell leaned forward. "Marcus, what did you do?" "I pushed her away. I told her she had fooled me, that I could never be with someone like her." His voice became barely audible. "She cried even harder. She said I wasn't who I seemed to be, that real men don't abandon people because they're different." And then, something inside me snapped. I grabbed her by the throat. I just wanted her to shut up, to stop crying. But I was stronger, and she was weak. The room fell silent. Marcus cried, not hiding his tears. "Marcus, do you understand that you are confessing to murder?" "Yes. I didn't want to kill her. I swear I didn't. I just wanted it all to end." "What happened next?" "I realized she was dead. I panicked. I got in the car and drove home. For 2 days I couldn't eat or sleep. I waited for you to arrive." Mitchell ended the interrogation and sent Marcus to a holding cell. The case was practically closed, a full confession, a motive, evidence. All that remained were the formalities. News of the arrest quickly reached both families. Linda Collins arrived in Akron from a neighboring town immediately after receiving a call from the police. Marcus's mother was devastated. "This is impossible," she told Detective Mitchell in the station hallway. "Marcus is not capable of murder. He's a quiet, kind boy." "Mrs. Collins, your son has confessed to the crime." "But why? Why did he do it?" "He felt betrayed. Cynthia hid her wealth from him, and he couldn't handle it." Linda began to cry. "I always told him he needed to get out and meet girls, but not like this." In the same town where Cynthia lived, David Jenkins received the news of the arrest with relief mixed with bitterness. "At least justice has been served," he told his brother, "but that won't bring Cynthia back." David felt no hatred for Marcus, only deep sadness. If he had just left that day, Cynthia would still be alive. She would have gotten over the rejection, just as she had gotten over other disappointments in her life. The trial began 4 months later. District Attorney Jennifer Hartman presented the case as second-degree murder, a crime committed in the heat of passion, but without premeditation. Marcus's court-appointed attorney, Robert Campbell, sought to have the charge reduced to involuntary manslaughter, citing his client's mental state and lack of intent to kill. "My client was misled about the nature of the relationship," he told the court. "He spent significant amounts of money and made plans for the future based on false information. When the truth came out, he experienced emotional shock, which led to a tragic, impulsive act." The prosecutor objected. "Regardless of the circumstances of the relationship, nothing justifies the murder of an innocent woman. Cynthia Jenkins had a right to privacy, including the right to decide when and how to disclose her condition." David Jenkins took the stand. His testimony was emotional and powerful. "My daughter was a good person," he said, looking at the jury. "Yes, she had Down syndrome, but she worked, loved, and dreamed like any of us. She did not deserve to die because she was afraid of being rejected." Marcus also testified, repeating his confession and expressing remorse. "I will never forgive myself for what I did," he said. "Cynthia was a good person. She didn't deserve what happened to her. If I could change anything." The jury deliberated for 3 days. In the end, they found Marcus Collins guilty of second-degree murder. Judge Robert Henderson sentenced him to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. "Mr. Collins," the judge said as he handed down the sentence, "your crime is particularly tragic because it was based on prejudice and an inability to accept differences between people. Cynthia Jenkins was a good person whose only fault was wanting to be loved." After the trial, Linda Collins moved closer to the prison where her son was serving his sentence. She visited him every 2 weeks and tried to support him, but the relationship between them was strained. "I don't understand how you could do such a thing," she said to him during one of their visits. "I don't understand either, Mom," Marcus replied. "I think about it every day. I see her face every night." David Jenkins sold the house on Maple Street and moved in with his brother. He could no longer live in the place where his daughter had died. Mary's Cafe installed a memorial plaque in memory of Cynthia. It hung near the entrance, reminding visitors of the kind girl who had worked there. The case was closed, justice had been served, but the tragedy left scars on the lives of everyone it touched. Cynthia Jenkins dreamed of love and acceptance, but instead she encountered prejudice and death. Marcus Collins allowed fear and shame to destroy not only someone else's life, but his own as well.